All right, so at this point, we are at the end of day whatever this was. It took 9 parts to get through the first day of his testimony. It starts getting a little hairy after this because we run into some legal issues between the newspapers and the judge and the higher court that ruled something and then took it back. So whatever. Now, at the bottom of this summary that I'm reading, it does have a list of Jake's charges. So I don't know if I've ever gone over those or not. So all the members of the Roden family, the immediate 4, were charged with 28 counts, and Jake was charged with 29. So in exchange for Jake's testimony in the trials of any family members who face a jury, the prosecutors have agreed to dismiss the possibility of the death penalty for himself, Angela and Billy, and George. I believe this is also contingent on Angela's testimony. So she testified this week, so I'm not sure where this stands, but I'm sure we'll find out. So Jake and the other family members were charged with 8 counts of aggravated murder. If you don't know the difference between aggravated murder and just like regular murder, aggravated is murder that is committed in the act of committing another crime. I'm a hairstylist, not an attorney. Don't come for me. That's just the way that I understand it. So in this case, the aggravator for this would be breaking and entering. They were also charged with felony conspiracy, aggravated burglary, unlawful possession of a dangerous ordinance, which I believe is the silencers that are illegal, tampering with evidence, forgery, unauthorized use of property, interception of wire and oral communications, obstruction of justice, engaging in a pattern of corrupt activity. And then Jake was charged with unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, Hannah Mae Roden, who was 13 when their relationship began and 16 when she gave birth to their child. So Jake testified for a total of 3 days. They kind of seemed to break it up into pretty decent chunks. So the first day was walking through the crime as it was committed. The second day was talking about the immediate aftermath. And the third day gets into more of the aftermath, the Alaska, the cover-ups, and his ultimate plea deals. Jake, again, showed no emotion whatsoever talking about these things. He is an absolute fucking monster. Now, of course, the rest of his family is not immune from or exempt from being monsters. They fucking are too. And even in the slim ass chance that George didn't have anything to do with the murders, he knew about it, helped cover it up. And even if he didn't know about that, he's a piece of shit who was horrible to his ex-wife, and he deserves it. So, anyway, I'm going to take a break, play a game with my kid. I'll be back here in a little bit. We'll go over day 2 of Jake's testimony. See you in a bit. All right, I went in, washed my face, put my kid to bed. I'm going to try to wrap up Jake tonight. I need to get to bed. It is 11:15. I have to be at work at 9 in the morning. So I'm going to try to get through these, and then all we'll have left is Angela. So upon returning to the farm around 4:30 in the morning after committing all of the murders, Jake said he, George, and Billy returned home. Jake said he parked the truck with the false bed in the new barn that was up behind their house. And at this point, it wasn't enclosed. It was just a pole barn, basically. Starting. Jake also said that he removed the floor mats and all of his clothing. They put everything they were wearing, shoes, clothes, masks, gloves, into an old feed trough that they used to burn things. They put cell phones, recording systems, all kinds of stuff that they had found, basically any evidence in the trough, and Jake burned it multiple times until it was just ash. He also used a portable grinder to cut up all 3 of the guns that were used in the homicides. He said he cut the 2 handguns into 2 pieces, and the rifle was cut into 3 pieces. He used an acetylene torch. He melted the pieces down. Barrel, the firing pin, the serial number, stuff like that could make it harder to identify. Those pieces, he put them into a duffel bag and then buried them in a fence post hole in the barn. He said he removed a post from the barn and said he and George dug a hole underneath and placed a duffel bag inside for a later date. Jake buried the bag and replaced the barn post on top of it. Angela Canepa then asked Jake how strong his brother George was, and he replied, strong as a bull ox, with a smile. Oh, this family, they're so fucked up. Jake and George then helped disassemble the false bed in the pickup truck. Billy then drove it off. Jake said at the time he didn't know where it went. Later we found out that Billy drove it to Athens and gifted it to his niece, and the title was changed over to her name that day. George also returned that same day without the truck, and Jake said he found out several months later where it had gone. After he burned the things repeatedly until they were just ash, he put them in a dumpster to throw them away. He said that he and his family watched the news broadcast, that he couldn't remember exactly what was going on. He just remembered the helicopter that was circling Chris Sr.'s home. He did say at this time both of the children, Bullvine and Sophia, were awake, but they were in George's room watching cartoons. Head over to the next part. We will get into more of his second day of testimony. Jake testimony day 2, part 2. At some point, Jake says he remembered a friend called him, shocked, to ask if he had seen the news and knew what happened. Jake said he acted, quote, shocked and mournful-ish, unquote, while on the phone. He said when he got off the phone, he called Chelsea, which was Frankie's ex, the mother of his older son, Brentley, to ask whether the children, meaning Frankie's infant and Hannah's infant, were okay. Chelsea told him that they were at the hospital, so he said he told Angela to watch Sophia, and he drove to Adams County Regional Medical Center in Seaman, Ohio. Yes, it is called Seaman, Ohio, but it's Seaman, where the children were being checked out. This is where he had the encounter with April Manley. If you go back towards the beginning, we went over April Manley's testimony. She was one of the first witnesses. My cat will not stop tearing up my welcome mat. Hold on. Jake said that he had he asked Manley about taking Hannah's baby Kylie, but not in a custody way. And that he said that Hannah had called him the night before, but he hadn't answered. Canepa asked him if that was true. Apparently, he told that to April Manley at the time. Angela Canepa asked him if that was true, and he said yes, it was. The next day, Jake called his attorney to let him know that Hannah was murdered. Consequently, the family never had to use the forged document that gave Jake custody of Sophia in the event of Hannah Mae's death. Because of Hannah Mae's murder, Jake pretty quickly got custody of Sophia. And he didn't tell Sophia that her mother was dead until a week or two after the murders. And I'm going to go on a limb and assume that he didn't say that her mother was murdered. He probably just said she went to heaven. And I want to say I've read that somewhere too, that he said she just went to heaven. Jake, George, and Billy went to the Roden family funerals, although they didn't take Sophia to any of them, including her own mother's funeral. Like, I get it. The kid's 2.5, but that's her mom. You have to take her to her mom's funeral. Angie Canepa asked Jake about his relationship with Chris Sr. and Gary. He said he liked Gary and had gone hunting with him on at least one occasion. And his relationship with Chris was very close. And he said that he looked at Chris Sr. as a second dad and hoped to one day call him his father-in-law. He said that even after he and Hannah had broken up, Chris Sr. had still supported Jake. Jake said after the murders, he couldn't stand to talk about what he had done, even with his own family. His mom and dad offered to be ears to listen to him, and he decided instead that he was going to bottle it up and just never mention it. He said, I couldn't bear to think of what I was doing at the time, nor what I did afterwards without feeling immense guilt. But now, Jake Wagner testimony, day 2, part 3. Jake, after saying that he couldn't think about it without feeling immense guilt, also said that he tried to erase the incident from his memory. Personally, I hope this motherfucker thinks about it all day, every day, and can't think of anything other than the look on their faces as he took their lives away. Anyway, after they'd been interviewed a couple of times, the family started getting nervous, thinking BCI was listening in. And at that point, Jake and Billy decided, oh my God. At that point, they decided it was time to dispose of the duffel bag, which was still buried in the barn. I just spit all over my lip. And Jake and his father mixed concrete and poured it into 4 5-gallon buckets, inside of which they placed the gun parts. These apparently were boat anchors, and I'm going to show you a picture. So these were the boat anchors that held the gun parts. These buckets were placed in the large pond at the Flying W farm. They attached chains at the top of the buckets. Although George initially helped with the construction, Jake did the bulk of the work on a goose house. He then attached the buckets to the goose house to operate as weights, and the family took the whole thing to the Flying W to gift it to Jake and George's grandfather. The goose house remained in the lake through the arrest of George, Jake, Billy, and Angela. So I assume this was a house that was anchored but would float so that the geese could get in it. I'm not real sure. So in case you didn't know, Jake didn't create, he said Angela did, but there was a GoFundMe account to benefit Jake after the murder of Hannah Mae. Jake originally had a GoFundMe to recoup the legal costs of the custody battle over Sophia. He said he didn't create it himself, but he knew about it, and ultimately he thinks he received about $1,000. So then after this, they started talking about the fight that happened the night that Tabitha ran away, and Jake, in true youngest child spoiled brat fashion, said he knew exactly what day it happened. It happened on November 10th or 11th in 2014 because he remembered the fight, and ultimately, as a result of the chaos from this fight, everybody forgot Jake's birthday. Jake then further tried to talk shit about Tabby. I don't believe anything he says about Tabby, even if it is true, just because he blatantly says he doesn't like her. So he's already proven himself uncredible with this. So he said he never saw George hit Tabby, but he saw Tabby hit George. And that one time Tabby was leaving, she yanked Bullvine out of a high chair, hit his head on a door frame, and then put him in George's arms so fast that they about dropped the baby. And they were just in a big fight, and that's what started it. It, of course, ended with Angela saying, "That's it, I'm getting my gun." Go to the next part. Jake Wagner testimony, day 2, part 4. Jake Wagner then went on to talk about the incident where Tabby took the bike and rode to the gas station. Jake told his brother that she was going to call the police, so George needed to beat her to it because the first call is the first served, and that he needed to get ahead of her as far as calling as far as domestic violence would go. He said his memory about the custody fight that ensued over Bullvine was not clear, but he remembered George had an attorney and that he'd overheard his brother and mother talking about the situation occasionally. Ultimately, he knew Tabby was only to have supervised visits with her son, and he couldn't remember a time that she was able to visit without one of the Wagners present. So then they shifted the questioning to May of 2017 when the Wagners packed up all their stuff and moved to Alaska. While they were in Alaska, they learned that BCI agents were searching the Peterson Road home that they sold before they left. And he said he believed his grandmother, Frederica, called his father to tell him about the searches. Jake said, quote, "To be honest, I was not nervous when asked about how the searches made him feel." He said that he said he might have felt upset, but he was mostly angry with BCI agent Ryan Scheiderer because he had spoken to Scheiderer several times before the move. He told Scheiderer the family would be coming back, and he felt that the agent was just toying with him. At one point, they were stopped at the Montana border. We've already been over that. Angela Canepa asked if the family was talked to by BCI at that point, to which Jake responded, "I wouldn't use that word, but yes." Jake said when they left, they didn't speak much in the vehicle because they assumed it had been bugged, and they did assume correctly, even though they didn't set it up right. And in true psychotic Angela fashion, the first place that they went was to a nearby hospital. Bullvine told the family that agents at the border gave him and maybe Sophia too sleepy Kool-Aid juice or something. Naturally, they took the children to the hospital to test them for sedatives because these people are absolutely fucking insane. And if you back up, you remember George in the car telling their kids that these people were going to hurt them. And yeah, of course they tested negative for any kind of sedatives because why would they fucking drug young children? They were in Ohio for just a month, and then they headed back to Alaska. To avoid another encounter between the children and border agents, Jake said he and George each drove a trailer up, while Billy, Angela, Sophia, and Bullvine flew after driving to Washington. After they returned to to Alaska from this trip back to Ohio is when they started attending the Emmanuel Baptist Church in Seward, Alaska, and this is where he met his future wife, who is now his ex-wife. So head to the next part. Jake testimony, day 2, part 5. So, Jake, being the outstanding gentleman that he is, when asked his wife's name, he didn't know it. He didn't know it. He knew her name was Elizabeth, and he was struggling to recall her last name. He said, quote, "That's shameful," and laughed nervously, but was able to produce her name, Elizabeth Freeman. Her name, of course, is now Elizabeth Armour, and she testified to Freddie prior to this, telling the jury about her relationship with Jake and the travels and their brief marriage. Jake said that the pair dated 6 to 7 months before he proposed to her on a beach, although he couldn't remember like the year that this happened. Some basic math would have told you the year that this happened. They planned to have a long engagement, but they were pushed to move the wedding date up rapidly. Armour said they intended to remain engaged for 2 years. This is Elizabeth. She had said they were supposed to be engaged for 2 years, but she ended up getting married a month after he proposed. Jake said that the wedding date had to be quick because the Wagners had planned to move back to the lower 48. And he said that he, Jake, and Billy, that's supposed to be he, George, and Billy, had failed to secure long term. They'd struggled to find affordable property to buy, and Sophia and Bullvine missed farm life. Jake was worried that a long distance relationship would end their relationship, so they were married in March of 2018. Conveniently, didn't mention raping her on their wedding night, but he said the day after, he and the rest of his family went to Missouri from Alaska, and Elizabeth later flew down to join them after a holdup with her passport. When they were in Missouri, Billy decided to go ahead and return home to his mother's farm. And then he and George drove back to Ohio, and then George drove back one day later to Missouri. Jake and George were able to find jobs in Missouri, but they weren't able to find property to purchase, and Jake said he believed their request for a loan was denied. After a couple of weeks in a hotel, Jake said either Angela or George came up with the idea to return to Ohio and move into Angela's father's home. He had died while the Wagners were in Alaska, though the family didn't return for his funeral. Fucking classic. Jake said they tried to return to the region quietly, but by this time, the press release seeking any information about the Wagners was released by then Attorney General Mike DeWine, now the governor. They did move into this house in South Webster, Ohio. Jake explained the house pretty much the same way that Elizabeth did, detailing who slept in what room and the trucking job that he and George picked up that took him on the road 5 days a week. And he said that he had spoken to Elizabeth about moving into a space of their own, but it had just never happened. He was asked a couple of other questions, so go over to the next part. We will keep going. Jake, testimony day 2, part 6. Angela Canepa asked Jake. Jake is testifying. Angela Canepa asked Jake whether there had been issues within the family about Jake telling Sophia she could call Elizabeth mom, but Jake said that hadn't been the issue. They had said I should not make her call Beth Ann her mother, he said. I assume they is referring to his family. He, of course, denied that he was a piece of shit, saying that Elizabeth couldn't see her family. He never warned her. He never told her that she couldn't talk to them or anything. The only one that he said that he didn't want her talking to were her 2 brothers who had sexually abused Elizabeth as a child. And she did testify to that as well. And actually, what he said was that he didn't want them to know where they lived. Jake said he didn't recall her being accused of giving the children food poisoning or stealing money. And the main thing he remembered about her journals was an entry where she expressed concern that between Sophia and Angela, she'd have to compete for her husband's attention. Jake, of course, did remember Angela's claim that Sophia said that Elizabeth had touched her inappropriately. Jake said he wanted to believe what his mother said wasn't true, but he was concerned about the seriousness of the allegation. Canepa asked if he remembered telling Armour what he would do to her if he found out it was true, and Jake balked. He said he told Armour that if he found anyone, not just her, that had touched Sophia inappropriately, he would physically beat the person to death with my hands. So apparently he gave up on old Lucille, and he's going to use his fists of glory now. Angela Canepa then asked Jake if he had come to a conclusion over whether he thought that Beth was telling the truth or not. And he said that ultimately, yes, he had. That he had questioned Sophia and had prayed about the issue for weeks until he got an answer. I have no comment on that. He said she being Sophia, She relayed that she felt that Beth Ann was stealing her daddy from her and she just wanted her to leave. Well, you can tell that Angela's raising this child. She is manipulative as fuck. That is not me criticizing a child. Don't get that twisted. That is me criticizing Angela putting this shit into a young child's mind who at the time was like 4 years old and doesn't know anything other than what she's being taught. So stop coming for me telling me I'm an asshole. I know it only happened once, but still, y'all need to fucking chill. I'm still pissed about it. This is where the trial for day 2 ended of Jake's testimony, and then we went over into day 3 where they finished direct examination. So we will go to the next part, get started in that. I am going to wrap Jake up, even though I am fucking exhausted. So we're going to get this done, and then we'll worry about Angela another day.